This is The Conductor by Sarah Quigley. It's a tremendous novel. I read it about 10 years ago, just after it had come out. And it's about the first performance of Shostakovich's Seventh Symphony, the Leningrad Symphony. Sarah Quigley's written a beautiful account, a fictionalised account of the circumstances around the composition of this symphony and its first public performance. It's set over the winter of 1941 to 42, which is the period when the Nazis, laid siege to Leningrad, St. Petersburg as it was and subsequently became again, and attempted to starve the inhabitants of Leningrad into submission. The opening section describes life in Leningrad before this siege, and it really good at evoking the kind of life of the city, its everydayness, its squabbles and its joys, and the feeling of a city. So you're kind of on side with the people of this place before the invasion, or rather the encircling of the city comes about. Shostakovich is trying to write a symphony that will evoke the kind of spirit of resistance of the Russian people, and he refuses for a long time to leave the city. The Russians are willing to evacuate him further into the country and away from the invading forces, and in fact a lot of the cultural establishment have been taken out of the city, so the people who are left are struggling a bit to fend for themselves. The plight of the city's inhabitants is evoked incredibly as the winter progresses and the siege tightens. They're out of food and they're being bombed and bombarded from the sky, and everyday life becomes harder and harder, and there are some incredible scenes of people boiling their shoes, the leather of their shoes, to try to make soup. Family pets get eaten. The people are, some of them, eating rats, and there are even discoveries of bodies in the snow that have had the fleshier parts removed, and it's left to the reader's imagination what's going on there. The buildings collapsing on top of people, all this sort of thing from a siege is quite amazing. Shostakovich and his family could be taken to Moscow by the Russian authorities, airlifted out, but he refuses to go because he's obstinately working on his symphony, and he wants to be in the city to experience it and to reflect its situation. He does eventually go, and the story, as well as centering on Shostakovich, it focuses on this man called Karl Eliasberg, and he's a kind of rather inadequate individual. He's the conductor of something called the Leningrad Radio Orchestra. The main orchestra, the Philharmonic Orchestra, is airlifted out to Moscow, and it's Elias and his radio orchestra who are left to possibly perform the symphony. I do think Sarah Quigley is a tremendous writer. Her descriptions of the city under bombardment are magnificent, but also she's good on character. I don't think much is really known about Elias, the conductor, so she's able to invent this character, or certainly to embellish him, and he comes across as a rather petty-minded and self-pitying individual who feels he's been overlooked in the cultural world, but also recognises that this is potentially his big moment when he can conduct this symphony. And he drives his orchestra on. The Russian authorities give them extra rations because of the the possibility that this performance can be a morale booster and demonstrate Russian resolve to the rest of the world if and when it comes out. So Elias does have some resources, but his orchestra have been dying. Some of them are so weak they can't hold their instruments, or whilst in rehearsals they're falling off their chairs. And it's magnificent kind of evocation of obsession, really, driving on through this incredible period. The tension through the final section of the book is incredible, as the orchestra struggles with Elias to be ready to perform the symphony. What they're going to do is turn all these big speakers onto the Russian forces outside the city and blast them with this incredible piece of music. It's also hopefully going to be broadcast around the world to show the world that Russia is fighting on. And the musicians are so weak, they can, as I say, barely perform or rehearse, and there's a real tension about whether they will get there or not. And it is leading up to that moment that forms the conclusion of the book. I think it's a really, really good read, as you can tell from what I've said. I think it's good in that, as a non-musician, I found all the bits about the music incredibly interesting, informative without too much exposition. I don't know whether I learned a lot about music, but I learned a lot about the kind of compulsion behind writing, composing and performing. It was exceptionally good, exceptionally good. Since reading the book, I have obtained a copy of the symphony, and while I really, really enjoy it, I'm sure that that's been enhanced considerably by reading this book first. So I'd recommend the package of the book plus the music to anybody. Finally, of course, this book is a reminder to some extent of just how horrific it is to live in bombarded cities. And it's October 22 now when I'm recording this, and of course we know how dire and awful the situation is in the Ukraine. And in a sense, perhaps a book like this helps us to be even more sympathetic to people who are suffering such awfulness. So I thoroughly recommend Helen Quigley's The Conductor. I think it's a great novel. Thank you.